Most of us want to be creative. Most of us want to have good memories. I think that this is a universal desire within us. We like the idea of being an innovator. We like the idea of being intelligent, like being able to recall tons and tons of information. Okay. The problem is that these two ideas or these two abilities are at odds with each other, and we as creative individuals can suffer from a poor memory, or we struggle to recall information, and then people who are typically very good at recalling information can struggle to be creative. And there's a lot of reasons why this is the case. I'm not saying that being creative can prevent you from having a good memory, or people who have really good recall can't be creative, but there are a lot of traps in this area that if you are not careful, you will start to suffer from. And so if you lean more creative, you may struggle to have a good memory or to even be creative in ways that are actually important. Or if you are just constantly recalling information perfectly, you're going to struggle with coming up with new ideas or improving the ideas that you're working in. So let's go into each issue one by one so we can dissect this little problem. So let's talk about the classic idea of a centaur. A centaur is essentially a horse and a person put together, right? They just cut off the person's torso, and then you take the horse's head and you just put the two together, and then you have a centaur. This is the classic Thomas Hobbes explanation of creativity in his book Leviathan. I think it's an actually really good explanation for what creativity is. Essentially, it boils down to memory is reinforcing ideas. Creativity is changing them. Let's dissect why people who tend to be creative tend to have bad memories, and people who tend to have good memories tend to struggle with creativity, and how we can meet in the middle. There's a study where people who performed an undemanding task that encouraged mind wandering actually performed better on creative tests in the future, or 20 minutes later, whatever. But the problem is, if your mind is wandering, you're going to struggle with paying attention to the information that's coming to you, right? This is the critical thing. Like, you cannot remember things if you're not paying attention, but if your mind is wandering, it helps you come up with new creative ideas. So it's like completely at odds. Your mind wandering facilitates creativity, but mind wandering facilitates not paying attention to what you're trying to remember. There are studies where children whose minds wander. There are studies where children whose minds wandered. There are studies where children whose minds wandered struggled to remember information and had worse recall than children whose minds didn't wander. We got it. Okay. Another thing is creative people tend to fabricate reality. And when you are fabricating new realities and coming up with new things, and these new things, if you start to believe it, or you forget what's real and not real, can make you literally delusional, I suppose. if you are coming up with new things, you're going to be creative and you're going to be thinking of all this new stuff, and you're not going to be able to recall what's actual reality and what's not. And this can affect your general ability to recall information properly. The same thought processes that allow you to be creative are also the same thought processes that are going to affect your memory. People who are creative will filter out less information than people who are not creative. When you filter out information, all these sorts of connections and associations that you could make are not, you just can't do it anymore because you filtered it out. It's gone, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like, you want to be focused on the important things, and sometimes you're going to exclude or include information that is relevant or not relevant. Sometimes you may exclude something that is the critical thing, that, the underlying problem that could solve whatever it is that you're working in. Or sometimes you're going to include information that is completely irrelevant to what you're trying to solve. It's a sort of spectrum, right? You don't want to have too much information to where you're spreading yourself thin and you're thinking about too many different things and you're ignoring the important points, but you don't want to have too little information to where you're missing the big picture. Now, how you structure your thoughts is really important. Essentially, people who are creative, they're prone to a different structure. You literally structure your thoughts differently than someone who is less creative. To a degree, right? Let's be general here. Don't pigeonhole yourself into some sort of identity where you believe certain traits of yourself and you're kind of reinforcing certain patterns of thinking because of your identity. And that's a whole nother topic, but I just feel like it needs to be said right now. But people who are creative will structure their thoughts in a sort of web, right? Where you're making connections from like one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. And it's all crisscrossing and connecting in that way. But people who are less creative will tend to structure their thoughts in a more linear list, like boom, boom, boom. Like you have a category and it's very structured of like colors, red, magenta, cyan, whatever, right? Black, white, just boom, 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 boom. You have all these colors. But someone who is creative may see like they structure colors in like a looser sort of way where they're imagining, a house, and they're associating a color with a mood or a sky or an experience or an object, and they're making these sorts of connections to things differently, right? You see how that can kind of like facilitate a different line of thinking when you're mentally conceiving colors based on your experience and based on connections to reality versus like a more practical, or not practical, but like a more rigid, let me recall every type of color that there is, right? Like when you present it in that way, it can kind of limit how you use that color. But it's also useful in a sense of like being able to recall like different colors, to be like, do I want to use blue here? Do I want to use purple here? And so on. Here are a few takeaways. Memory essentially boils down to repetition. Creativity boils down to innovation, change, modification. Like you are taking two different ideas and blending them together, or taking one idea and breaking it apart, when reinforcement is like constant repetition of this one idea over and over and over. So there are two different types of people. Typically, where you are is a bit of a spectrum between these two. And it's okay if you're one or the other. You want to embrace your sort of skill set or your preference for your type of thinking. Like some people genuinely like to remember lots and lots of information, and some people like to be very innovative and coming up and constantly come up with new ideas. And here is the final point. You ready? Memory and creativity aren't just a sort of pattern of your mind. They are strongly related to how you take care of yourself. So, REM sleep has been shown to improve your consolidation of memories and also your ability to problem solve and be creative. You get bad sleep, you're gonna have a bad memory, and you're gonna be uncreative. Exercise is linked to an improved memory. Walking through nature is linked to creativity and problem solving. Higher intake of saturated fats and refined sugar is linked to worse memories, Alzheimer's, and all sorts of mood problems, health problems, cardiovascular issues, you name it. Alcohol affects your REM sleep. Bad REM sleep, affects your ability to problem solve, as I've said before. Alcohol! Stress can affect your ability to recall information. It literally affects your hippocampal structure. Dehydration will affect literally everything. Rehydration, in studies, has shown to improve your mood, fatigue, and focus, and all sorts of other stuff. I don't really care to say caffeine. You get the point. I know there's all sorts of stuff. But basically, you take good care of yourself, you walk through nature, you get good sleep, you eat a healthy diet, your memory will improve, your creativity will improve, blah, 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 blah. And here is the most critical thing of all. If you like, comment, and subscribe on this video, you will gain magical powers. That's stupid. Have a good day. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Take care of yourself. Use this knowledge. Learn. Be a individual. Be yourself. Don't be yourself. But have a good day.